How's it going, everyone? This is Boots with Snapkeep Arcade, back with another deck guide with Spencer Howland of Constructed Criticism. This week we're talking about Izzet Drakes, a prominent tier 1 deck played at Pro Tour Guilds of Ravnica this month. Thanks for joining us here at Snapkeep Arcade, Spencer. Why don't you start by telling us the overall strategy of the deck?
Yeah, so Izzet Drakes is one of the decks that has tons of different ways you can build it. There's the Drakes version, which is, the Enigma Drake, Crackling Drake version. There's the Mystic version, which is the one we're going to talk about today. There's Electromancer and non-Electromancer versions. I think Electromancer is kind of coming up as the correct way to build the deck. So I'd like to kind of start there. Goblin Electromancer is a card that we see play in Modern in Storm. It's a blue and a red for a 2/2, and then it makes every spell that you have, so instant and sorceries, cost one less. So the way that this deck works right now for the Electromancer versions is it plays lots of Charter Course and Tormenting Voice, as well as either Radical Idea, and then there's a blue-black version, I don't remember the name off the top of my head, that lets you draw a card and then Surveil 2. Some lists will split their Tormenting Voice with that. One of the things that I think is really key with Goblin Electromancer is that you are playing Tormenting Voice. And the reason to do this is so that you can use the most of your mana all game. So if you split your draw effects between red and blue spells with Electromancer, it means that you can play more 1 mana draw 2 effects. So you can play more Charter Courses per turn because you get to play Tormenting Voice. So that's a pretty big key with a Goblin Electromancer. It also makes things like Lava Coil cost 1 less, things like Beacon Bolt become basically terminate, things like that. So Goblin Electromancer is really the key to the version of the deck that we're going to talk about now, and I think the correct way to build the deck.
Awesome. Let's go over the creatures in the deck.
Yeah, so those that we have here is 3 Crackling Drake, 4 Goblin Electromancer, 4 Arclight Phoenix, and 2 Murmuring Mystic. Murmuring Mystic is kind of the key card here and the difference between something that you might have seen in the last 2 weeks. Murmuring Mystic is a 1/5 for 4 that has a similar to effect as something that you might have seen in the form of Young Pyromancer in Modern, making a 1/1 for every spell you cast. The difference here is that these 1/1s have flying. Murmuring Mystic is probably one of the best cards in the mirror and probably one of the best cards in the format, and it's kind of going under the radar right now just because of, the Pro Tour already happened, so people aren't talking about Standard as much. But if you're going to a PPTQ or you're playing on MTG Arena, this is a card you should probably be worried about. Its 5 toughness is really big, making it almost impossible to kill in the mirror match, as well as also impossible to kill for a lot of decks that maybe are relying on things like Lava Coil. The Crackling Drakes are just these huge flying threats that just win the game all by themselves. They draw a card when they enter the battlefield, so you get to go through your deck, things like that. They're just kind of super powerful enablers to the deck to just do the most powerful things that you can possibly be doing. And if you've played any of the Jeskai deck that we talked about a few weeks back that Snapkeep likes, then you know the power of Crackling Drake, its ability to just be a 16 power creature, and this deck isn't any different. In fact, it becomes bigger faster. This thing is going to have 9 power basically every time you play it.
Let's talk about the other spells in the deck.
Yeah, I think that the number of draw 2s that you want or the number of draw effects you want is pretty conditional upon the Goblin Electromancer versus non-Goblin Electromancer. But basically, I rank the draw spells as number 1 Charter Course, number 2 Radical Idea, and number 3 Tormenting Voice. To be honest, this is based off of other people's thoughts on the deck. I actually really haven't been impressed with Radical Idea. I know that every deck plays 4 of them before they even play their 4th Tormenting Voice, but Tormenting Voice has really impressed me. It lets you cycle through your deck much faster than Radical Idea. Now, the difference is that when you have Goblin Electromancer, you'd probably rather have Radical Idea. And the reason for this is just you get a double spell with Radical Idea really easily, which makes your Arclight Phoenixes better because those Arclight Phoenixes, you're going to put them into your graveyard with your Radical Ideas, your Charter Courses, and your Tormenting Voices. And then once you get to cast them for really inexpensive mana, or you get to shock your opponent's face or kill the creatures, those Arclight Phoenixes are going to go back. So, those are the main key points of the deck, is those draw spells cycle you through your deck, drawing more draw spells to get your Arclight Phoenixes into play and to keep you ahead on card advantages. You either block or attack with your Arclight Phoenix while you're killing your opponent's creatures. I think that the next thing that's really important here is going to be the removal package. For this deck that we have on the screen, we have 4 Lava Coil, 4 Shock, and 2 Entrancing Melody. Entrancing Melody is a card that is starting to see more play because people are going a little bit bigger because of this deck specifically. The way that you can beat this deck is by getting things out of reach of Lava Coil. So if you can play Entrancing Melody or Beacon Bolt, you're able to kill things that are, a little bit too big for things like Lava Coil. And especially Shock too, right? Like Shock doesn't deal a ton of damage, so being able to kill things with Shock or Lava Coil is really big in the deck, which makes things like those 2 Sideboard Beacon Bolts that we'll talk about in a little bit even more important.
Perfect. Do you have any tips and tricks with the deck?
Yeah, I think that the number one thing that I would think about in this deck, and especially in the main deck, is you might be blocking with your Phoenixes more than you think that you're going to. And if you're never considering blocking with your Phoenixes, you're probably wrong. I think that the biggest tip that I would give is that in this specific version, your Murmuring Mystics are not 4-mana spells unless you don't think your opponent can kill them. So if your opponent can't kill Murmuring Mystic, you're going to jam it on 4, and then you're going to untap and probably win the game. If they can kill it, it's much bigger than a 4-drop, and you want to treat it more like a 6-drop, or even more depending on whether or not you have a Goblin Electromancer in play.
Let's go over the sideboard now.
Yeah, so this sideboard that we have here is based upon a couple things. So we have one more Murmuring Mystic, 2 Beacon Bolt, one more Crackling Drake, 2 Niv-Mizzet, 1 Ralzeric, 2 Shivan Fire, 2 Dive Down, 1 more Entrancing Melody, 1 of the Mirari's Conjecture, and 2 Negate. I think that the key things here is that we see Shivan Fire. This means that we actually need, against certain aggro decks, to play even more shock effects, and we also don't mind the kicking side having even more things like Lava Coil in our 75. Being able to Lava Coil for, you know, a little bit extra mana to kill even more 4 toughness things is pretty big. Like I said, you're trying to beat decks that are trying to go too big for you to beat, so Beacon Bolt is going to be really important there. One of the things that you'll notice, a distinct thing missing here, is there's no Disdainful Strokes in this sideboard. I think that as I've been playing this deck, Disdainful Stroke has been not the most impressive card. It's really, really good when you have a Goblin Electromancer against the Golgari decks, but outside of that, it's never at its best. One of the best cards in your sideboard is really Dive Down. Being able to protect your Niv-Mizzets, being able to protect your Drakes is pretty big game against a lot of decks, really letting you play kind of a tempo control game against them, a Delver style game, and shutting them out of the game otherwise. Mirari's Conjecture is really taking place of something like a second Ralzeric. The point of the card is that a lot of decks, specifically black-green, they might be prepared for you bringing in something like Ralzeric. So if you bring in an enchantment, it's a little bit harder for them to interact with that card, and it gives you the same, if not more, value on specific turns than something like Ralzeric would. If you think about Ralzeric, one of the things that you'll see is, you know, you're going to come down and kill a creature, hopefully untap with it and get a little bit of value. With something like Mirari's Conjecture, it's going to come down, you're instantly going to get an instant back. Your deck is actually full of a lot of instances, and the instant part is actually super easy to activate. It's actually the sorcery part that's the hardest. For the sorceries in your deck, you basically only have Chart of Course, Lava Coil, and then depending on if you're playing Beacon Bolt after board, you'll have that, but it's actually kind of hard to get that part and activated. However, the final part being the, you know, until end of turn, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, copy it, that part's going to let you go off and actually just win the game on the spot against a lot of the time against black green specifically, and that's really where it's for. It's so that you have a diversified threat density against that deck specifically. Just remember that your dive downs are a key card here. People are going to upgrade their removal to fight against you specifically, and you want to turn that off against decks that are going to do that. So in any matchup where you think your opponent's going to try and beat you by making your light threat deck non-existent in threats, those are the matchups that you want dive down, and that's kind of the key thing to think about.
Let's talk about key matchups with this deck.
Yeah, I think that your matchups with this deck are surprising. I think that you are the best deck in the format against Jeskai, and I don't even think it's very close. As somebody who's played both sides of the matchup, I think that Jeskai basically can't beat you after board. They're like pretty good against you game one, but after board, between things like Negate, you know, your Conjecture, if you want to bring that in, Ralzeric, Niv-Mizzet, they have a really hard time dealing with you. And then Murmuring Mystic is kind of perfect against them. It doesn't die to something like Justice Strike. You never have to attack into it into a seal away. They can't kill it with Lava Coil. It's a really tough matchup for them, and you need to play to your strengths in that matchup specifically. Goblin Electromancer is a card that you got to pick your spots at. I had a game even today where I decided not to play my Electromancer early against green black, and then they explored a Ravenous Chupacabra to the top, and then my Electromancer looked really silly, whereas I could have triple spelled had I just played it the turn before. So understanding how your Electromancers are going to work, how your sideboarding plan works against different decks like green black and things like that. We're really in a 5-deck format right now. It's straight up 5 decks, right? You have this deck, you have green black, you have mono white, you have Jeskai, and you have mono red. That's kind of where this format is at, and those are the type of things that you need to build your sideboard around. Things like mono blue and stuff like that, that's not something you're going to need to worry about. You just need to worry about those 5 decks and try and build your deck accordingly.
And finally, How do you beat Izzet Drakes?
Basically, decks that beat this deck are decks that are good against Niv-Mizzet post-board and that are good against your main deck plan. That's going to be decks that have a high number of Ravenous Chupacabra that don't care about the rest of the things that you're doing. And that's kind of it. I know a lot of Izzet players think they're very favored against green-black decks. I personally don't find that to be true. I think that when you go off, Izzet Drakes is one of the better decks. Last week, we talked about Mono Blue, and that when you have a Curious Obsession, you're favored against everybody. And I think the same thing is true as Izzet Drakes a lot of the time. The difference is that this version isn't the same as those versions, right? We're not playing Enigma Drake. We're not playing Maximum Velocity. We don't get a bunch of free wins for people not being prepared for us. We're really playing Izzet Control with a really synergetic game plan with Arclight Phoenix, using our Arclight Phoenix as removal spells throughout the game by blocking and getting them back by triple spelling. That makes this deck harder to play, and you have to think about your play patterns a little bit more in this deck than you typically would.
All right, Spencer, anything you'd like to add?
No, I think this deck is actually surprisingly fun. Hopefully this Sunday I'll start this video series on #Quest410. So I'm doing a video series where I'm going to try and get 10 wins with every major archetype in all of the major constructed formats. So I started with Izzet Drakes this last week, and I've really been enjoying the deck. I've tried probably 20 different builds already, and that's one of the really fun things about this Quest for 10 that I've encouraged other people to join me in, is when you try and get 10 wins and you try different stuff, you really get to learn about decks. And I've learned a lot about Drakes. The version that we're talking about now is, John Stern's list. But, I'm trying even different things. And I know a lot of people have different takes on the deck. And it's part of why the standard format is so fun. Now, I just want to thank Snapkeep Arcade for doing these videos with me every week. This is becoming one of my favorite things to do each week. So thank you so much to you. And thank you to all the viewers on both my channel and on your channel. If you haven't checked out Snapkeep Arcade and the rest of the stuff he does, and you're listening on my channel, please go there, hit that sub button, hit that like button, give Andrew some love. He really deserves it.
Thank you so much to Spencer Hallen of Constructed Criticism for doing yet another deck guide and for all the kind words. Our next deck guide will be released in just a few days, and we'll be going over a sweet brew that's both new and competitive. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and make sure to subscribe to Snapkeep Arcade and hit that bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. This has been Boots with Snapkeep Arcade. Thanks for watching.